Good morning to everyone here in our WRI DC office who are here with us in the conference room, and also to everyone who's joining us on the phone. We're very excited today to talk to you about some of our Global Forest Watch Small Grants Fund projects. My name is Jessica Webb. I'm the Civil Society Specialist and oversee the Small Grants Fund program, and I'm here with Liz Cole, who is our intern, who will be helping to field questions. So the way this is going to go is I'll give a really quick overview of the Small Grants Fund program, and then I'll turn it over to three wonderful presenters that we have who did their Small Grants Fund projects last year and are joining us from different countries around the world, so they can tell you in person about their Small Grants Fund projects. Okay, so just really quickly, for those of you who aren't familiar or those who need a refresher, the Global Forest Watch Small Grants Fund objective is to help civil society organizations around the world use Global Forest Watch tools, data, and also technical expertise of our staff for forest management, monitoring, but also advocacy, journalism, and research. So we have about 12 projects a year that have worked so far in about 28 countries to date, and Global Forest Watch provides the grantees with up to $40,000 US, and then also technical assistance and support in implementing their projects. And so today we're going to hear from three great projects that we had last year. First is the Sociedad Peruana de Derecho Ambiental in Peru. And then next we'll hear from African Wildlife Foundation, and then finally from Reporter Brazil. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cristal Sheshke from Sociedad Peruana de Derecho Ambiental, and so just give me a second so we can unmute her.
I can do it from this one just now.
Oh, you can?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi guys.
Thanks. Hey, Crystal.
Hi. Hi everyone. Hi Jessica. Hi Liz. So I'm Crystal. I'm the project coordinator for Conservamos por Naturaleza, which is an initiative of the SPDA, and we were the ones who implemented the Global Forest Watch grant. Next slide, please. Next one, I think we can skip that. So basically, we used the Global Forest Watch GLAD alert. It was meant to be the form of it, and we ended up using the GLAD alerts in the context of private conservation, which is what our initiative works with here in Peru. So basically, privately protected areas or any kind of protected area that's not run by the state. And so that can be on private land or it can be on public land through a concession. Overall, we have, there are like 150 different privately protected areas all over Peru. Those include private conservation areas, concession, ecotourism concessions. There's a whole bunch of different legal categories. And overall, they protect 1.5 million hectares. The reason we work with these areas is because they tend to protect places that the state maybe can't get to, or places that are very close to settlements or towns, and so they're very important components of landscape conservation if you combine them with the overall national protected area system. And on a more social side, these people are also very important leaders, local leaders and also national leaders of the conservation movement in Peru. Next slide, please. So it's a very diverse group of stakeholders. We have, there are people, old families from, let's say, Lima, who have a lot of land and want to conserve it, or you have rural communities, families, lots of different types of people. So it's a very, very diverse group of stakeholders that we're working with. Next slide. And the problem, the size of these areas ranges from anywhere from like 3 hectares to something like 40,000 and more. And obviously, little ones don't have as many problems with monitoring their forests, but the big ones, because they're private initiatives, unless they're sitting on a whole bunch of money and or happen to have a funder, a lot of them don't have the resources to actually monitor their forests and do patrolling, etc. So I mean, just like the national protected areas, but here they don't legally have any access to funding from the state for monitoring. There's also the problem that in some of the areas that we work with, the terrain is just very, very difficult to get through because they're cloud forests, mountains, ravines, etc. So anyway, and overall, just monitoring of their forests is extremely difficult. Next slide, please. So the slide has a lot of text. So basically, that's where we saw the opportunity for the Global Forest Watch GLAD alerts. And what we ended up implementing with the help of Global Forest Watch was this kind of chain of alerts where we were like a data middleman. And so we would receive the alerts, and the team at Global Forest Watch helped us set up a custom API where we basically, the alerts were filtered right into the shape files that we had uploaded to the system, so that we only got the alerts for the private protected areas. And I think how many we had in there, I think it was like 120 or something shape files in the end. I might be wrong, but quite a lot of shape files. And so basically I would get a huge Excel with all of the different alerts, but already separated into the different private protected areas that were receiving those alerts. And then the SPDA team would then send these coordinates to the respective person who would be in charge of doing the follow-up on the ground. So we ourselves didn't do the ground truthing, but we forwarded to the people who would be responsible for doing that. And then where possible, we would ask for feedback as to how useful their alerts were, what it ended up being, whether it was a landslide or illegal settlement or something like that. Next slide, please. So what did we find through that? So deforestation is extremely diverse. I mean, the reason why it takes place. We found that some of it was due just to territorial conflicts, basically where people had maybe placed their boundary markers wrongly, and so maybe the neighbor thought, oh, I actually have this much land and I can build my farm up to here, when actually the border was in a different place, and that's how the deforestation happened. And that kind of thing is very easily solved, because you just have to basically reset rearrange the borders and the agreements between people. There were also a lot of cases, especially with the big protected areas that maybe have a very far away border that they hardly ever visit, that illegal settling was taking place, and that's then very difficult to deal with, because unless you have the support from local authorities who are willing to go in there, the protected area managers themselves don't have the capacity to just go and tell people that they can't settle on a piece of land, because it might be very dangerous. And what we also found, what was very, very interesting for us, is that there was a clear difference between real conservation areas and fake conservation areas, where we saw that in very particular regions of Peru, the legal category conservation concession is being used as a front for illegal wood extraction. So that's very interesting, and that's what we're really trying to follow up on as well with our respective state partners. Next slide, please. So yeah, so this is just like a quick, the kind of pivot tables that I would send around to people that basically summarize the deforestation alerts per region in Peru, per month, etc., based on the Global Forest Watch data. So there you can see, for instance, that there's a very clear difference between different regions. Like for instance, Ucayali is a region where we know that governance is regarding forest, governance is very, very, very poor, and that's where we have the highest number of alerts. Ucayali is basically the illegal logging capital of Peru. Next slide, please. Yeah, and yeah, I would also send a map to the people so that they can visualize it. And I would use CartoDB for that. Next slide. So obviously, yeah, we did have a bunch of issues that we were dealing with. The data is getting bigger and bigger, obviously, so we're having to think about where to do the cut. What's definitely a problem is ground truthing, because unless you do ground truthing, just the alert itself is not enough to start legal action against something. So let's say there's like an illegal settlement or something in a piece of land, or illegal logging going on. Unless you have on the ground photos and you have you have more substantial proof, the police isn't going to go in there. So the Global Forest Watch role is as a kind of flagging tool that tells you, okay, something's going on here, go check it out. But if you don't have the funds to go check it out, like unfortunately that's where the chain of action kind of stops. So it's very, very important to try and get funding or state support or something, or like, local networks or something that help each other out to do the ground truthing in the end. Also, obviously, identifying between the fake conservation cases that I mentioned and the real ones, and obviously dealing with the regions that have very, very poor governance. Next slide. Yeah, so we in general we were really, really, really happy with our collaboration with Global Forest Watch. If the team is there, I'd like to say thank you also. Yeah, we continue to, obviously the project is over, but we're still trying to squeeze this into other projects that we have so that we can keep the service going to the privately protected area managers who've been very, very happy with it. It's been very useful for them. They've been able to stop deforestation before it got out of hand through the alerts. So yeah, so we're trying to increase the capacity for ground truthing through some of the grants that we're writing, and what would also be a useful thing is having access to better high-resolution satellite imagery, so that it can help you out in identifying the type of deforestation that's happening before having to do the ground truthing, so you don't send people into the field just because there's been a landslide, for instance. Yeah, and I think that's my last slide. I don't know if you could do if you're doing questions at the end or right now, but thanks very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Crystal. That was great. We'll take questions from people in the room over the microphone, and then for people who are online, if you have any questions, please type them into the window in the GoToWebinar, and we'll be sure to read them out and have Crystal address them. So, are there any questions?
Maybe, yeah, my question is, and thanks for the presentation, very interesting. Did you get an idea about the deforestation that was being detected this way as compared to what the owners of those lands would have detected anyway? Did they feel that a lot is detected that they wouldn't have picked up themselves?
Could you hear the question, Crystal?
Not really.
Okay. The question was, did you get a sense of the degree to which the area owners were able to detect deforestation, like with the alert system, as compared to what they would have detected otherwise?
Oh yeah, yeah. But the usual reaction was like, "Oh God, I didn't know that was all happening." So yeah, it was really, really useful. In some cases, especially if there was an NGO involved, that is kind of like helping that particular conservation area. Sometimes they have an idea that something might be happening on the other side, but this would be like the concrete kind of indicator that something is really happening and showing the extent, etc. So yeah, it definitely showed a lot of alerts that nobody had any idea were like of deforestation that nobody had an idea was happening. So yeah, it was very, very useful in that sense.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was just wondering if the conservation concessions that were being used as up front, if you're able to prove that or get those concessions canceled, or if those are still valid.
So the question was about the conservation concessions that are being used as a front. Were there any consequences? Like, were you able to get those canceled or investigated?
What we're doing right now, unfortunately, in the specific case of Ucayali, because governance is so poor and it's a very complex political situation at the moment right now, there's actually like a whole bunch of protests going on because they just arrested this like mafia of illegal logging. It's a very delicate political situation, so there we haven't done anything except for pass on the information. In another case, in Madre de Dios, where there's also quite a large deforestation, we at the local level we're working with OSINFOR through our regional office, like basically it's a state or the state agency that would be in charge of following up removal of the concession, etc. The thing is that obviously what needs to happen is a bigger project where you actually train because the conservation concessions get allocated at the regional level, not at the national level. What should happen is that people are trained at the regional level or made aware of that they cannot allocate conservation concessions to just anybody, and especially not if their name is, translated, the artisanal loggers of Madre de Dios or something like that. And that's what's been happening. Yeah. So it's a bigger project. It's a bigger challenge in terms of training the authorities in charge. But yes, we are following up with OSINFOR, but unfortunately, like they're the ones who have to then take the next step in terms of actually having the conservation concession. What is that called? Not canceled, but it's when you lose the right to have the concession.
Okay.
Revoked, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And then we have one more question from someone online.
Yeah. So we have a question from Caroline. She was wondering, what imagery are you relying on now? Is it Landsat? And what size resolution do you think would be ideal for monitoring deforestation? And how often were the images you were using coming in?
Well, we actually haven't used any imagery so far. We've just been using whatever was available on Global Forest Watch, and we were in talks with Carto-DB to get some kind of image deal or something like that. But in the end, we didn't get that through because we didn't have funding. Because it still comes down to I think $10 per image or something like that. And it was just like when we were dealing with like 7,000 alerts. So. That didn't happen. So in the end, what we actually did was the alert basically went straight to ground truthing or on the ground, some kind of on the ground coordination. So we didn't actually have the whole satellite imagery step. What resolution? Okay, this is where I'm not a technician, but it has to be close enough for you to see whether it is, whether there is, for instance, like a house or whether it was a landslide. So it would have to. It definitely has to be a lot closer than I think what's on Global Forest Watch Round, which is the EarthCast. I don't know what resolution that is.
15 meters.
Yeah. So I think either that isn't coming up as well for all of the areas because of the cloud cover. But in any case, that wasn't working for us. So it has to be better than the EarthCast. That's my yeah.
Great. Great. Well, thank you so much, Crystal. I really appreciate it. That was great.
Thank you, guys.
So now we'll move on to our next project. Hear from David Williams from the African Wildlife Foundation. So take it away, David.
Thank you. Good morning. Can folks hear me?
Yes. Loud and clear.
Great. I am David Williams from the African Wildlife Foundation, a conservation NGO focused on Africa, of course. And we are witnessing an era of rapid innovation in conservation. On the ground, smartphones and new software streamlining data collection and venture law enforcement monitoring. From the sky, high-frequency satellite remote sensing products of deforestation and fire are readily available thanks to the marvel that is Global Forest Watch. So this project explores how we can apply these innovations to benefit adaptive management in the remote reaches of DR Congo. Next slide, please. So the Billy Uele Protected Area Complex in the light green there is one of the largest in Africa. It borders CAR to the north and is in the northernmost extent of DRC. It's larger than the U.S. state of New Hampshire. So AWF took an interest in the area because it supports the largest continuous population of eastern chimpanzee in Africa. If you click next, you'll get a photo.
Muted.
Thank you. And one of the largest forest elephant populations in DRC. Next. And despite its assets, there was no conservation management in the protected area complex. It was essentially a paper park with no government presence whatsoever up until recently. So AWF, collaborating with the Protected Area Authority of DRC, ICCN, is working to introduce conservation management to an 11,000 square kilometer subset called Billy Mbomu, and that's the purple outlined area in purple. So next. So the region is subject to accelerating threats, historically low human density and incredibly inaccessible areas kept threats at bay, but that is changing with commercial poaching. The ranks include Joseph Kony's Lord's Resistance Army, the notorious rebel unit, who are based typically in southern Sudan, but launch raids to harvest ivory to fund their operations. In the 1970s, there were 60 to 100,000 elephants, and now the population has been reduced to 2,000 to 3,000. Artisanal mining, including illegal gold mining, is attracting an influx of visitors to the region, driving demand for bushmeat and also driving deforestation. And we use Global Forest Watch data to determine that the Landsat University of Maryland Hansen data set to determine that within a 2.5 kilometer buffer zone around Billy Mbomu, deforestation, the rate of deforestation had doubled between 2001 and 2012. The lack of government presence here contributes greatly to insecurity and general lawlessness and are enabling conditions for the aforementioned threats. Next slide. Again, thank you. So AWF is working with ICCN to train and equip the rangers and basic skills, and including how to deal with armed conflict situations with the LRA. And next slide, please. A centerpiece of that effort is to introduce strong law enforcement monitoring using new tools such as SMART and CyberTracker. And CyberTracker is, as seen here on the smartphone, is an app essentially that streamlines data collection in the field, allowing touchscreen entries, and obviates a lot of the GPS and pen and paper, which the conventional process, which is laden with pitfalls and results in a lot of loss of data. So we're finding this to be quite transformative in Billy Mbomu and other sites. And the data is downloaded to SMART, which is a GIS system essentially designed to handle law enforcement monitoring data. Next slide, please. So the southern part, this is a look at Billy Mbomu, looking at the southern part, which is more primary forest or moist tropical forest areas, and going to the north, you can see in the yellow and areas are natural open lands, so a transition from primary forest and the south to a more savanna environment in the north. It's an immense area, even at the 11,000 square kilometer subset we're working with. And we, at the start, with limited resources, we are able to recruit and hire and train 20 eco guards. The area is only accessible on foot, so there's an emphasis here on being strategic in deployment of patrols. Next, please. So the premise of our efforts is that to improve law enforcement, studies have shown that it's increasing the probability of threat detection enables and then resulting punishment of the perpetrators is incredibly effective. And so what we're trying to do here, recognizing that we need to be really strategic in the deployment of limited resources, the question becomes, can we apply spatial modeling to better target patrol and improve adaptive management? Next, please. So we turn to MaxCent, which is a widely used species distribution modeling software, and it uses presence-only data, such as what we have from the law enforcement monitoring. So this is an example of a chimpanzee model, which we had 41 observations of either direct sightings of chimpanzees or evidence of chimpanzees like scat from the ranger patrols, which have only really only in the last 5 months. So it's a nascent effort. So we consider this model quite preliminary, but it's a start. So on the table on the left here features the driving variables behind the model. So land use influence is the top contributor, followed by deforestation, road density, elevation, and percent of sand in the soils. And so what we're doing here is essentially extrapolating from a limited understanding of the area through our frontline eyes and ears, the rangers, to the broader Billion-Bomi landscape. Next, please. And once we have this 0 to 1 model, where red is the red areas in the model on the left are likely chimpanzee areas, and the blue is unlikely. And so we can simply just transform that into a 1, 2, 3 GIS product for further analysis, and that product's on the right, with 3 being orange or the highest values for chimpanzee likelihood. Next, please. So then, getting into the geeky GIS fun of it, we can simply sum a chimpanzee product with a similar MaxCent created elephant species distribution model on the right to create a wildlife index, where the red areas again are the likely areas to encounter chimpanzee and elephant, and the blue are low. Next, please. And we replicated this sort of process using threats. Next. So looking at an array of salient threats, we used the law enforcement monitoring data to create models for hunting camps and ammunition and snares at the top. So that's the ground data. And then from the sky or satellite imagery, we created models of deforestation and fire. So the deforestation models from the Hansen and Global Forest Watch data sets from 2011 to 13 in this case, and the fire model is from the active fire or NASA data set, also available on Global Forest Watch. Next, please. So to create a threat index, we use the same process as with the wildlife index in summing up the models to create a threat index on the right. Here, however, we discounted fire as in recognizing that in savannas, fire is a natural process, so we discounted that by half and using a weighted sum to create our threat index. Next. Here's just a closer look. Again, the high values are in red. You can see the town of Billy on the lower right or southeast has kind of a halo of high values around it, predictably, to some of the other towns and along the road axis, which is in black. Next, please. So what can we do with these models? Are they just pretty pictures? So here's an attempt to bring them to bear to enhance our adaptive management. Next. So we take our two index models, the wildlife and threat, and we can integrate them next in a GIS analysis. Next, please. Into this integrated model. So we're essentially intersecting them, and where you get to identify areas where you have high wildlife and high threat values, and those correspond to the brighter colors, the red, orange, and purple areas. If you click next once, which identify areas that might be considered as priority patrol areas, and they only represent 2.1% of this landscape. So we're essentially trying to target the areas which are under most threat and have the highest values in terms of conservation for priority patrol planning. It's not to say that there are other factors that shouldn't be considered in patrol planning, like logistics and ranger safety, but this is just a starting point. Next, please. So we recognize that patrols, ranger patrols are the most significant investment of most protected areas. Therefore, it's critical to plan them carefully. The rangers are the frontline eyes and ears on the ground. It's and where conservation really happens. Validation. We did try to validate our remote sensing product. For example, with deforestation, we took, which was a 2001 to 2013 product, we took the Global Forest Watch data from 2014 and essentially intersected against our projected deforestation model product and determined that 86% of the 2014 or independent observation of deforestation fell within our modeled area, which only encompassed 13% of the landscape. So I think the modeled area the rate of deforestation was 8 times higher inside our modeled area than outside. So that suggests it's not just a pretty picture, it can be useful. And with more law enforcement monitoring data coming in, we hope to do the same type of validation with the ground-based products. We hope to streamline and automate our approach to take advantage of the high-frequency data streams, particularly the fire and deforestation alerts, to make our modeling and adaptive management more agile. And then longer-term data sets, as this model, as our data sets get richer and our models mature, we hope to be able to analyze seasonal patterns of threat and wildlife movement to improve our adaptive management as well. And we're essentially replicating application of this platform and other sites where we are doing law enforcement monitoring support using Smart and Cyber Tracker. So that's all from me today. Next, and I thank you again, Global Forest Watch, for the support and the opportunity to present. Glad to take any questions.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, David. Do we have any questions in the room or online? Going once? Going twice? Okay. Well, thanks again, David. We really appreciate it, and yeah, great project, and thanks for taking the time to share it with us.
Sure thing.
Okay. So now we'll move to our final speaker. We have Ana Aranha joining us from Brazil, and we thank her for taking the time to be with us. We know it's a little bit tumultuous times there, so we appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. So when you're ready, take it away.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And
Muted.
I apologize in advance because I didn't have enough time to prepare my slides. So I just put together a few of the images we used in our stories. So our project was our main idea. Well, it's a journalistic project, so our main idea was to disclose the real costs of the new and massive hydroelectric power plants that are under construction in the Brazilian Amazon. So we made a series of news stories, animation, and a short documentary showing the devastation, the flooding, and the social impacts caused by the power plants, which are called clean energy, and here in Brazil we call them green energy. So it's very problematic, and our objective was to bring this information for the overall public, the overall audience in Brazil. So our main challenge was to translate deforestation and all its aspects in strong images and easy to understand maps and stories. So next slide, please. We can see the first story published. Here we start to make this effort to combine the Global Forest Watch maps and tools to on-the-ground investigation. So next slide, please. Here's the first map. Here we used tree cover laws and SAD tools, which are all available in the Global Forest Watch maps. And here we were trying to show deforestation near the location where two large power plants were built in the state of Rondônia in the Brazilian Amazon. So the map shows the increase in deforestation caused directly and indirectly by the power plants, which I'll explain later. So in the next slide, we can see devastation inside an indigenous land. And this is a very interesting tool to use the Global Forest Watch maps. You can go to lands, rights, or protected areas, and you can mark the areas which are, indigenous lands and so on. And then you can cross this information with the deforestation. And here you can see between 2010 and 2014, this was exactly the period in which the dam was being built. So you can see how deforestation entered the area inside an indigenous land. In the next slide, it's a small sample of how we try to combine in our stories maps and data with local visualization of the forests. So this is a close look to what a degraded area looks like in the Amazon. This is inside the indigenous land we were showing before in the map before. And this is how illegal loggers operate in these areas nowadays in the Amazon. So they select only the valuable wood from the forest, and they make it very hard for the satellite images to catch it. So we call it degradation, not devastation of the forests. And this is something that's still very hard to locate with the tools available. So in the next slide, there's also a picture of inside the forest, and this is how the preserved forest looks like from inside. It's a castanheira tree, one of the tallest and richest tree in the Amazon, and the only one that's completely forbidden to cut. So this is what we were trying to do. We were trying to show the different sides of the story, combining maps with local pictures and pictures from above. In the next slide, we can see our second story, which is about the Telespires Dam. And here we are showing how the forest is destroyed by the flooding. So while creating the power plant, it's needed to clear a big piece of the forest in order to build the lake. So we discovered that the power plants in Brazil are flooding the forest instead of clearing the forest beforehand. And flooding the forest, of course, causes the release of large amounts of methane gas, which is completely opposite to the idea of clean energy. So in the next slide, we have what the flooding looks like in the map. So you can see that the pattern of devastation is completely different from a regular deforestation, and this is because the flooding follows the course of the river. So these large power plants in Brazil are not creating artificial rivers. They are mostly using the course of the river to flood the forest nearby. So this is how it looks like. It's also devastation, it's also deforestation, but by flooding. In the next slide, there's a photo of how the flooding looks like from above. We were the first in Brazil to release this picture, and we went after this after we saw the maps and we saw the phenomenon in the maps. And then we got this picture, and there was a good repercussion when publishing it, because people could actually see how the dams look like when they flood the forests, and it was a new thing for the main audience in Brazil. And again, always combining with the overall data and maps, so we have, in the story, had a good contextualization of the problem, not only the image itself. In the next slide, we can see a map of the overall area around Telespires Dam, the same dam responsible for the flooding. And then we can see that besides the flooding, the largest impact is caused by the construction itself of the power plant, and what we call the indirect deforestation, which is caused by the arrival of large number of workers and people who are attracted by the construction sites. These are areas inside the Amazon forest with very little economical opportunities for the local people. So these local cities, these dams are built near very, very small cities. So these cities are flooded by large amounts of people who are looking for new opportunities, and they rarely have the right infrastructure to receive all these new people. And also in the map, we can see the yellow dots. That's the power plant itself, also a good tool to use in the Global Forest Watch map. You can locate all the old dams, newly built dams, and the dams that are planned to be built in the next years. So this was a very interesting tool for us to explore. The next slide, we can see the Belo Monte story. This was our special feature about the largest construction sites in Brazil nowadays in order to build the Belo Monte Dam. And we made a thorough local and on-the-ground investigation, going to the places where Global Forest Watch maps were alerting deforestation, and we could actually testify what the power plant was doing with the forests. So they allege that they are using the wood, they are clearing the forest in order to create the lake, but they allege that they are using this wood, making donations for local cities and making donations for the steel industry. but actually what we found was that they were burning the wood in the place where the lake is going to be created because it was too expensive for them to transport it. So in the next slide, you can also see a picture of the large amounts of trees that they're burning, which is completely illegal. We made a video out of these images and we sent all the rough material to the Federal Environmental Agency here in Brazil. They sent a local team after our story was published to inspect the area, and now they're processing this fine, and the dam is very likely to be fined for this illegality. So the next slide, we can see a map of the larger picture of the area where Belo Monte was built. Again, the dots show, the yellow and green dots are showing the powerhouses, Belo Monte powerhouses. And you can very clearly see the devastation directly caused by the canal that was constructed by the dam. So in order to change the course of the river, they built a large canal, which is half the volume of the Panama Canal. So the Amazon is so big that it's very hard to have an idea of the size of things, but this is half of the volume of the Panama Canal inside the Amazon forest. And you can also see the indirect devastation caused by the arrival of new people around the power plant. The next slide, we are back to the on-the-ground scene, so you can see what's left of the local forests. The major devastation caused by the dam was in what we call islands, so they are river islands, which makes it harder for the government to make raids and to inspect, because they are hard to reach, areas that are hard to reach, and also make it harder for the local animals. So the dam is supposed to remove the animals from the area they're going to be burned, of course, or cleared, but that's not what we saw on the ground. So in the next slide, you can see a small sample of what happened to the local wildlife. Here we found a dead alligator in the middle of an island. So the alligator was trapped inside the flames and probably died from the smoke of the fire. We found it in the center of an island that had just been burnt, and this is also something that we sent to the environmental agency, and they are also processing this case to see if they have enough evidence to fine the dam as well, and hopefully avoid this happening again. And well, to end the presentation, we have a small part of the animation we made. So we were always trying to combine the maps and tools and local images. So we put together this small video animation to try different forms of visualization. So there you can see the map, the city of Altamira, which is near Belo Monte. And this city saw the number of inhabitants increasing 50% in the short period of 2 years. And then we use these visual effects to try to explain why the arrival of new people are a big factor of deforestation, because they build houses, eat food, and food and wood comes from the local forest. So the increasing number of local people is a big factor for the increase of deforestation. Here we go back to the global forest map, and we are trying to show that the dams were supposed to have protected the areas. So there are conservation units that were supposed to be created, but they weren't created by the government. So we went to the areas that were supposed to be protected, and we showed how the devastation happened on the ground. So here we're combining global forest map with the local images to show the local invasion of conservation areas. And then again, indigenous lands. Cachoeira Seca is a big indigenous land in the area that was invaded by illegal loggers during the construction of the dam. And again, we went on the ground and we were showing how the illegal loggers trucks are stealing wood from this area. And this is it, I think. It's a short presentation, but I think that's a good overall of what we did. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay. Thank you so much, Anna. That was wonderful. Do we have any questions from anyone in the room or online? Everyone's very quiet because it's so early. Yes?
Yeah, so thank you for your presentation. So the companies that, were building these dams, I'm just curious if they sort of know about the work that you're doing and if you've had any problems maybe with those companies. I'm just curious, if they know or what the deal is there.
Mm-hmm. So the question was, do the companies who are building the dams know about the work that you're doing, and what has their reaction been, if at all?
Well, yes, of course, we talked to them during the investigation, and we were trying to get answers and explanations of what happened. It wasn't very easy to get their feedback, so they answered a few emails, but very evasive. And after the story was published, they were questioning a few aspects of it, but mostly, just normal journalistic back and forth of questioning. And now we are only dealing with the Federal Environmental Agency, which is the one who has some power to do something. And they were very, of course, the company was very bothered by our stories, so they published a few pieces of propaganda in Facebook talking about the story and contesting our stories. This is Belo Monte mainly, and we had a good repercussion in all of them, and especially in Belo Monte, with the help of all the other journalists and environmental agencies who were questioning the dam. The license of the dam was actually suspended for a while, and they already received big fines for all the environmental crimes they were committing. So I guess we were one of the forces pressing against the illegalities.
Great, thank you. Other question? Yes?
How effective do you see these fines as a deterrent?
How effective do you see these fines as a deterrent?
Unfortunately, I think it's very ineffective because these enterprises, Belo Monte costs something around $10 billion, and the fines, I was just looking this up yesterday, all the fines they received up until today, they are around $300,000. So this is very, very small near their the size of the enterprise. So the size of the enterprise, sorry. So we think that the only thing that could really change things, well, the fines help, but the thing that could really change things is if the environmental agency stops the licensing process until the dam would make everything right. While they are just fining them, it's easy for them to pay the fines and keep doing the same things.
Mm-hmm.
So we have one last question from Christelle. I'm going to unmute you now so you can talk to Anna directly. So,
Hi, Anna. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much. That was really amazing. I'm really inspired by your project. We're actually planning on something similar here because of the Marañón River dams, where they're planning, I think, anywhere between 8 and 20, depending on who your source is, of big dams on the Marañón River, which is one of the main rivers that then creates the Amazon. And I wanted to ask you, so obviously the role of your organization was more in terms of putting out the information, if I understand correctly, no? Like, so making some noise about all the issues. But I was wondering, what kind of network did you have of other actors that you either had or you think you would need to actually do something against these big companies? Because obviously what you said, what you mentioned now is that it eventually led to a fine. But what else needs to happen? Like who else needs to be involved when you're planning this kind of campaign so that the information actually leads to something? Like were you guys proposing for a specific policy, like policy change, or what were you trying to do?
Well, we were connecting with some of the biggest NGOs, environmental NGOs in Brazil, that are also pressing against the illegalities committed by these dams. And they were a big, very, very important source for our stories. So we were pretty much working together all the time. All our findings we were bringing to them. They were helping us to contextualize. They were using our material as well in their campaigns. So this is what we can do. You know, we can partner up with the other and bigger institutions that are also on the ground, that are also investigating these dams, and work together. So, for instance, one of the images we released was taken by ICV, which is a big institute, environmental institute in the Amazon. I think they probably work in Maranhão as well. In Belo Monte, we were very close to ISA, which is also a relevant institute. Greenpeace also helped us in the Tapajós. And what we were focusing after talking with them and discussing our common strategy was this idea of questioning the concept of clean energy. So this is something very strong for the Brazilian audience. They actually believe that hydroelectrical plants are sustainable and they are clean, and there are not relevant impacts for anyone or for the forest. So we were really making an effort to break that image, and this is something that we are doing in our stories in dialogue with ISA, with Greenpeace, and with ICV. So this is what we can do, maybe try to change this concept. This is not something that Repórter Brasil will do directly in the Congress, but this is something that ISA will do and Greenpeace will do. They will lobby to try to change the concept or to try to press for a change of law. But we were mostly working with the journalistic side of the story, just pressing and putting out information about it.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much to Anna and also David and Crystal. We can get a round of applause from those of us. We really appreciate it. We recorded the webinar and we'll be posting it on the Global Forest Watch YouTube channel in case you missed part of it and you want to go back or watch it again or share it with your networks. If you have any questions about the Small Grants Fund, feel free to email us at gfwfund@wri.org. And if you have, for those of you on the line, if you're working on similar things and you'd like to share your story, please go to the globalforestwatch.org platform /stories, and you can submit your own story about what you see happening on the ground. Thanks very much.